Excuse me, sir. You in the Gradle socks there?
Who, me?
Yes.
Yeah, what do you want?
I'd like to talk to you about local builds. Is that something you do in your job?
Local builds are important for everyone. Local builds make the tool chain better and eliminate friction and toil from the process of developing software.
Now, as you see people using local builds, are they doing that to save cloud costs, to use the hardware that's on their desk? Both, all of the above, none of the above?
All of the above. So, we've had this shift where builds became too complex for any single laptop in a lot of cases. And so we then had to move those builds out into more powerful cloud environments so that the builds could be completed in a reasonable amount of time. But what we're learning is that if you actually optimize those builds, if you actually reduce the amount of avoid the amount of overall work that has to be done by taking advantage of technologies like caching, test distribution, and predictive test selection, that you can actually pull all those builds back and do them locally. So it saves your cloud costs, but it also gets that feedback in the hands of the developers faster, which at the end of the day, that's what developer productivity engineering is all about, right? We want to make sure that we keep developers in a flow state as much as possible so they're happy and being as productive as they can.
Now, if I'm a shop where we're not doing local builds, what sort of transitions and transformations am I looking at?
Well, there's going to have changes kind of all across the board, really. I mean, you're going to have to start with the build tool chain itself and figure out, are there parts of this build that could be optimized? So for instance, Gradle has a built-in cache alongside its incremental build functionality. And that means that during clean builds, if the exact same set of task inputs are passed that have already been run before and we have an existing output and setup classes, we can pull that work directly from cache as opposed to rerunning it. So that's one way we can start to slim that down. Then, predictive test selection allows us to use machine learning to try to prioritize which tests are likely to provide the most interesting feedback to developers based on those changes. So that's a second step that we can go in and optimize and avoid work. And then finally, if those two things are complete and there's still work to be done, we can put agents in place to distribute the remaining work across elastically scaling agents. So we start with the build tool itself, and then we have to move into CI at that point, right? We have to start deciding, when do we still want to check our builds into CI? Is it post-merge? When does it make sense to actually do that? So there's process changes that would have to be involved as well. But of course, Gradle Enterprise makes it pretty easy. Just flip a switch. Your Maven, Bazel, Gradle builds are already taking advantage of all these things.
So with things like predictive test selection, I'm not running every test on a local build. What's the best practice for saying, all right, at this point, we've obviously got to run all the tests?
Definitely post-merge, right? Predictive test selection is super interesting, but it definitely scares developers when they hear that there's a chance that they might be running tests that they actually should be running. Now, our models are very accurate, high degrees of confidence. Right now, we're seeing after a couple of weeks of training that we generally get our confidence scores up above 99.5, which is amazing, but it's not perfect. And so we recommend that post-merge, in the CI, that all tests be run before actually packaging. But it still saves a ton of time in the local development experience for the developer. It allows them to ask for feedback more often and run their tests in their local environment. Right. So that's where the real value of predictive test selection comes in. But absolutely, just to be extra sure, post-merge mechanism should run all tests no matter what.
And are you seeing that with local builds, especially with these technologies, people build much more often and with smaller changes?
Absolutely, right? That's a big part of the value here, right? When a developer is able to release smaller change sets and they're able to ask for feedback more frequently, they tend to do better work because they're cramming less work into every single change set. That also helps downstream with fewer merge conflicts, right? So there's really a performance and productivity impact, but there's certainly an impact to quality too when developers are able to ask for feedback more frequently and refine their work.
Well, Justin Reock, developer productivity engineer extraordinaire, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the insight.
I appreciate the questions and enjoy the rest of the show, and I'm going to get back to fixing my sock.